Tonight to present our information on our community youth specific to the lens of mental health and belonging is our Chief Institutional Effectiveness Officer, Dr. Dwayne Schmitz. Dwayne, welcome.
I think it would be better if you can do it from the table, just so that everybody sort of sees you and can participate in what's going on. Yeah. You can move that tag.
Okay.
Yeah, if it doesn't, then stay up there, but, you know.
Let's check it out. It might work. And if not, then I got Liz.
Dwayne, I just want to start by saying I appreciate your agility because I know that you get energized by standing when you speak.
That is true.
And so you just be your authentic self. You're going to be great. Well, your presentation skills are going to be great. So just thank you for being flexible.
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. So it is an honor to be here and get to give voice to this information. There's so many folks that I'm sure would love to be able to do this as we talk about what matters most, right? Kids' mental health and well-being in our district, in our community. And it is a community conversation. So I'm going to move relatively quickly because we want to save the time for the conversation, but I'm just going to set the table by putting some facts in the room that are local PSD facts that I think you'll appreciate. We're going to look at student voice, we're going to look at teacher voice, family voice in the various surveys and data collection instruments we have, and just hit some high-level points, okay, that I think will set the stage for a fruitful conversation. Poudre School District does a student connection survey once a year, for about 7 years now, and we measure student connections to adults, to their peers, to their interests and passions, to their feelings of safety. We also measure the 5 CASEL social emotional learning or CEL standards in that survey, so we're going to see some data from that. This data you're about to see was derived actually the survey closed about a week ago, and we have 14,132 student respondents voice in this data, so that's quite a bit. That response rate for our student population we give it to, which is our 4th through 12th graders, is about 74.4%. That's the response rate, which was up from last year at about 65.2%. And no matter how you cut the cake, those are pretty good response rates for a survey. Okay. So this first slide is just highlighting these CEL or social emotional learning competencies. I was mentioning we have 5 subscales. That's over multiple years. You can see 5 years of data. Those different colored lines are the different subscales. The subscales are basically identified on the right side in those colored boxes of like social awareness and decision making, self-management, relationship, and self-awareness going from top to bottom. You can see that the pattern is relatively consistent over those years in a couple of ways. But you can also see a slight decline if you're a careful observer in the overall composite scores. We can see this even more clearly. Just a slight decline in these self-reported social emotional learning competencies that kids are telling us they have on these 5 dimensions, okay? The items that I selected to kind of display up there are the lowest ranked items from the students. And so if you can see those from your seat, you can just get a quick feel for the type of items that fall into those 5 subscales, okay? I think one of the morals of the story on this one is just that all those 5 subscales are not being agreed to at the same rate consistently, like there's a pattern there, right? The 2 that are on the lowest level, the green and the yellow lines, align with relationship is yellow and self-awareness is green. And so this is just 2 areas that we can keep working with our students to build their skills in those areas. And if we had more time, we'd dig in a little deeper, but we don't, so we're going to keep moving along. This next slide is from the same survey, but it's the student connections aspect of the survey. The top line is the adult, like student to adult connections, % of favorable responses that students do to multiple items. The yellow is the student to student connections, And the blue, the baby blue, is the student's connection to their interest and passions. So again, you can see we have relatively high levels of student to adult connections, and we term it adults, not teachers, because it includes the way the items are written, it's all the adults in the building while kids are at school. And then you can see the next lower ranked, but is very close, is the student to student connections, and the lowest ranked one each year has been the student to the interest and passions. And that last subscale I just mentioned has the biggest difference by level. And so we see higher levels of students feeling connected to their interests and passions while at school, at the high school level, and it goes lower actually as you go to the lower levels of the system. At any rate, fairly consistent, and once again you can see some items on the right-hand side that help you kind of understand what the nature of those scales might be. Okay. Well, this is where it starts to get a little more interesting. We used to give the survey, the connection survey, anonymously. And a couple years back, we changed that so that we let the parents know and they can opt out, and the student can opt out of the survey if they want to. But we collect student information with the survey. And the reason we do that is because what we learned over time was that when you start crossing this connections type information and this social emotional learning type information that kids are self-reporting back out to us, the school district, on, and you start plotting scatter plots like the ones you're looking at there. The scatter plot on the left, each dot is a school. The scatter plot on the right, each dot is a student. Okay? And the horizontal axis on both of them is the composite score from the connection survey, so an overall kind of if you will, a rating of how connected a student feels at school. And the vertical axis on each of those scatter plots is the social emotional learning composite score, right? So students self-reported competencies in social emotional learning. And so when you create that scatter plot, you can see, let's focus on the student plot on the right, that most of the dots are clustering in the upper right-hand corner. And by the way, I had selected just a specific school for that particular, obviously that's not all the PSD students, right? That's from one particular school, just to illustrate. But you can see that most of the dots cluster in that upper right-hand corner, and the dotted lines, by the way, the little axes that are dotted lines up there, those are the district averages on those two measures. So when the dots cluster in the upper right, it means those students are self-reporting relatively high levels of connection and social emotional learning competencies. That's good news. But when you look at the dots in the lower left, which it's a lot more sparse in the lower left, those are kids. Each one of those dots is a kid who's self-reporting low levels, I would say, relative to the district averages, of connections while at school, social connections, and social emotional learning competencies. And that's why we got rid of the anonymous nature of the survey at one point, because our principals and our staff very much wanted to be able to reach out and just interact with students around this data, much like we do. We give kids an algebra test. We want to know, not how the class did. We want to know how the individual student did, so we can reach out and help and learn from the test and so on. It's very similar. Okay, we spent a little extra time on that slide. And then I guess the other point on the school slide on the left, you can just see that there is a distribution. And I guess here's one other important point. The connection survey composite score and the cell composite score, they're not measuring the same thing. You can see things are distributed left to right and they're distributed up and down, right? So those are two distinct concepts that we're tapping into through this survey. We did a lot of work, like psychometric work, and the survey has super good properties. Now this is the same type of a picture. This is each of these graphs left and right, these scatter plots are at the school level, so each dot is a school. The difference is that the plot on the left is limited to only students that are eligible for free meals. The dots on the right are for schools, but for students, limited to students that are not eligible for free or reduced. I hope everybody in the room can see that incredibly clear pattern of how both connections and social emotional learning competencies shift dramatically with socioeconomic status. And there's a pattern there that I think is actionable for us when we get to the point of talking about community partnerships and school efforts to help kids feel more connected to adults, to their peers, to their interests, passions, right? Not just at school. And what some of those barriers might be for students in achieving that. Okay, Switching gears to the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which I'm sure everyone in this room is relatively familiar with, we just want to highlight a couple slides. The first slide here, I grabbed a few items, represents the female population of PSD that took, respondents, 1,144 respondents, that took this survey in 2019. So not the most recent survey, but the survey just before that. And we had approximately 33% of our female students who were so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row during the past 12 months that they stopped doing some usual activities. So that's shocking, I think, in and of itself, okay? 30% basically. When we move that to 2021, so 2 years later, same exact item, same population students, but a much higher response, 5,465 students, because PSD kind of moved the Healthy Kids Colorado survey to all of our schools, middle and high, instead of just the ones that were selected by the state. You can see that that number jumped from a little over 30% to a little over 40%. It's almost about exactly a 10% increase. So things have gotten worse, not better, is the point, okay? Clicking it one more time, we're going to switch the item now. This is for male students. This is the 2021 survey. We had about 15% of our survey, our male students who were surveyed at the high school level, the respondents, that indicated that they purposefully hurt themselves without wanting to die in the past 12 months. So basically self-harm. Again, that's a shocking number, 15%. That's shocking. For females, same survey, same year, that percent jumped to 33.2%, so a little over a third. That's shocking, I think. Queer non-binary students, and I'm so thankful that the Healthy Kids Colorado survey added that item in this most recent round of the survey. It's been so interesting to slice and dice the data for that particular demographic. That number jumps dramatically to 69.1%, so basically 70%. That is a wake-up call. Especially what we're going to see in a minute is some information we now have about what percentage of our students in a typical student population are queer, non-binary, or non-heterosexual. And I think it's a higher percentage than a lot of adults in our state probably recognize. Okay, still in Healthy Kids Colorado survey. I know this is a busy slide. I apologize for that. I'm just going to highlight for you real quick. There's 5 items that we've got kind of highlighted on the left. They're all to do with health and wellness and mental health and such. Everything from the self-harm to the feeling, stress levels and such like that. And really the point of the slide is that when you separate out the non-heterosexual students who identify as non-heterosexual from those that identify as heterosexual, all of those risk factor indicators jump significantly. And I have a statistics quiz for all of you. How do I know it jumps significantly just by looking at that slide? Ponder that for 2 seconds. They give us some confidence intervals there, right? They give us some 95% confidence intervals. Everywhere that 95% confidence intervals do not overlap for 2 different groups, that is statistically significant. So if you ran the statistical significance test that would be appropriate, it would come out as significantly different. So a lot of times when we talk about differences between groups, somebody in the crowd says, well, are they statistically significant? In this case, they are definitely statistically significant, and you can see that for yourself just by looking at those confidence intervals. I also want to point out the blue arrow in the center of that slide mentions that for PSD, in this latest round of the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, 70.1% of our high school students identified as heterosexual. The other approximately 30% identified as not heterosexual, a couple different categories. For the middle school of Poudre School District, the middle school level, that number of identifying as heterosexual is 69.8%. Now I find that interesting because those are what you would call independent measures. There's no one kid that's both in middle school and high school, right? So the kids who sat down to this survey, and how many are we talking about? 5,000 something in high school and several thousand in middle school. This is not trivial. For those 2 numbers to come in that close to 70% is probably a pretty strong indication that estimate is probably pretty stable. And I bet you money that that's popping up throughout the state and all over when these kind of questions get asked. So I think that's a big, that is a larger subgroup, by the way, non-heterosexual, than many of the subgroups we normally talk about, like Hispanic, free lunch eligible, students that we support with integrated services. This group is larger than any one of those groups. So this is something just to acknowledge. Okay, similar Healthy Kids Colorado survey, but this time instead of the heterosexual, non-heterosexual, we're highlighting the female versus male, because there's an important pattern. You can see it statewide, and you can certainly see it in Poudre School District data, that female students have higher levels, like less positive outcomes on these mental health, wellness, risk factor questions, right? And most of those, the top 3 are statistically significant different between the males and the females, and the bottom, actually, probably all are. I didn't look carefully enough. Let's skip past that. I didn't look carefully. At any rate, there are the same types of differences we were talking about a moment ago. We can see by gender. Worth noting. Okay, we're going to switch gears to the teacher voice, if you will, Teaching Learning Conditions Colorado survey. I suspect everyone in the room is familiar with that also, because it's been in our state for several years. I just am highlighting one item, but it's a great item. We asked teachers statewide if they were concerned, their level of concern with decrease in student emotional well-being, health, happiness, and comfort. And this item jumped out on the whole survey as having such a strong response, where about 70% of all teacher respondents for Poudre School District indicated moderately concerned or extremely concerned. And more teachers indicated extremely concerned than indicated moderately concerned. And so I feel like this one item really indicates for us that our staff, and we hear this in many different ways, this is just indicative of that our staff are clearly seeing the mental health wellness challenges our students face, okay? Our families, we talk to our families also. So we do something called the Family Engagement Survey every other year. We're back on for 22-23. We'll be doing it this year in just a couple months. The first slide here is looking at the 2018-19 outcomes. I just want to do it to kind of set a baseline and then show you the change from 18-19 to 21-22. And so, 2021. And so if you notice the 2 little red bars on those 2 items, they're kind of like the negative thing, the thing that we don't want, okay? The top item says that your student has had opportunities to strive toward their personal, what we call above and beyond, and we define that above. It's kind of a healthy, pursuing of one's interest and passions at a high level. And we had 14% of parents say none of their students experienced that, okay? Other parents indicated either all of their kids did overwhelmingly or some of their kids did. The item below that asks about students pursuing above and beyond opportunities or activities outside of school. And so I want you to hold on to those numbers. 14% and 25% indicated in the negative on those 2 items, 14 and 25. When we go to the 2021 survey, the most recent one we had, those negative numbers jumped to 24 and 35%. Basically, they both went up by 10%, which is not a favorable thing. That's a bad thing, right? So we had 10% fewer parents who indicated their kids were experiencing their above and beyond in school, while at school, and we had 10% more parents indicate that their students are not taking advantage of those opportunities out in the community outside of school. One more slide, same exact type of picture, but this is trimmed. This is for also 2021, but it's for our Hispanic student population only. Interestingly, the above and beyond item, the top item within the school, actually was an improvement over the overall population. But when you look at the item, which is why I included it in this slideshow, on the percentage of Hispanic students' families that are indicating their children are accessing above and beyond opportunities or activities outside of school, the negative response on that was 46%. So almost half are saying they are not experiencing those opportunities. I think this matters because as we go to talking about next steps, and you think in sum, what does all of what we just shared and talked about mean? In my opinion, summarizing, it means that the youth of our communities, and I know this is not unique to Poudre School District, so hopefully this is a good representative talk from the wider community, are facing bigger challenges and need support, and they need partnership, and they need opportunities. And so Poudre School District and Superintendent Kingsley, I don't know if you would prefer to talk to this slide about some of the steps that we're engaging in.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Schmitz. So the 4 bullet points that you see on this slide, I think what's most important is that you know that they're student generated. When our board has engaged thoughtfully our student advisors, when we have partnered with our Larimer County Youth Advisory Coalition and listened to all of them, our students have suggested solutions that we need to pay attention to. The goal of this district and this community is to tell this uncomfortable, sobering story, but also do it in space of not a gloom and doom and bring us all down, but do it in a space of trying to destigmatize the scenario of what our children are experiencing every day in service of bringing all of us together as a community, not just a school district, to be collectively responsive and impactful in these particular areas. What I would like to elevate are 4 tangible solutions that I believe are achievable in this community in partnership with everybody around this table, as well as those who are not here, is that our children are saying that they want more safe spaces that are affirming and center on belonging outside of school. That's across all socioeconomic groups, it's across all groups of difference, and this community, as you saw in the slides that Dwayne was sharing, are experiencing those opportunities differently based upon, could be race, it could be whether they're a member of our Pride community or not. Those are things that we need to continue to be courageous and curious about and responsive to. But students want more spaces that they feel that they have ownership and authorship over, that they feel it's a sense of belonging, and we need to make sure that it's not cost prohibitive for any children or young adult to access them. The other piece that our young adults are telling us is they want to learn techniques of how to cope with what it is that they're dealing with, their own trauma. They want to better understand for themselves early warning signals. They want to understand how to regulate when they feel dysregulated. They want to be able to understand how to advocate, if you remember that self-awareness component of the SEL slide, in terms of being able to describe how they're feeling and know what to do about it. Our children are self-reporting that they need help in that area, and our system doesn't strategically and community strategically teach that. We do that in pockets. It is not a standard, it is not a part of our curriculum in every space, and students are asking for it earlier in their life. Our young adults who are older in our high schools wish some of the things that they have learned happened as early as late elementary school or middle school, and it would have helped them prevent potentially some of the trauma that they have experienced. So DBT training is one specific training. I am not an expert in what is the right training, so I want to disclose that. But some of the students that we have engaged with reference that as a training that has had a significant impact. And I'm really proud of the PSD staff who is working collectively with our mental health specialists, our school counselors, and other student support services to train other adults. Because the need is beyond the adults that we have available, and we have to make sure that this is available to families as well. The other piece that our young adults and children across this district have shared is that there is truly a stigma with asking for help. Students sometimes are more likely to speak to each other than ask for help, and they're not really yet certain on how, what does help look like? So overcoming that stigma, but having real specific clarity that there shouldn't be a stigma, that we should normalize it and regulate it as a community, as a way of life, but also be very explicit and very clear around what those resources are. And it should be branded across not just this school district. You shouldn't be able to go to a place of business across this community without knowing how to access this. I think there are some incredible resources that are coming out of the state. The iMatter program is one of them that we've heard some significant, really cool stories that I think have had recent expansions of state investments. So that's holding promise. But really localizing that and branding that and taking other things that are more local and try to combine that. There needs to be more coherence. And they want to make sure that it's not something that just adds to the stigma. You know, we need to be careful about that, and that's from them, not us. The other piece is, and they were very clear about this, and they challenged me directly, asking me if I'm spending more money on homecoming than I am on their behavioral health. I say that not to shame this community or this district, but to be courageous around what our children are actually paying attention to. In some instances, it may be a 1-month wait for a student to access one of their school counselors. It is up to a 6-month wait for a child in this community to access therapy externally, even if they have insurance. We have, as a county, above average amount of clinicians compared to the rest of the country, but the demand is higher too. And I would also say that as children and families are looking for mental health support, they're looking for support that they can identify with. So who those providers are matters as much as how many providers, and I want to be really clear about that. But they have asked very explicitly, can we just have somebody in our school that their full-time job is just to talk to me? Not to do my schedule, not to help me do the post-secondary planning, not to look at my grades, to help me with the trauma and the crises that I'm dealing with today because I can't wait another day. And that data that Dwayne so eloquently articulated, and I want to make sure that I'm not desensitized to it because I've been working with this data so often that I can talk about it off the cuff. But it's almost 50% of our students are experiencing hopelessness, persistent hopelessness. The number of students who have suicide ideation who are young adults in this school district is 1 in 4. When you look at the number of students who identify as members of our Pride community, those data points double. And they're waiting. And as we continue to normalize our lives on the other side of how we've experienced this pandemic, this is a story that as a community, an award-winning community, we need to talk about it more often and be more courageous about. And so these are the 4 things that our young adults and our children in our district are asking to deliver on. I am really energized that this board has prioritized its budget to help achieve and start some of these things. We have just hired and secured a marketing campaign, a marketing firm to work with our students to author what that mental health and behavioral health campaign will look like. And we're in the space of planning a broader coalition with our community to help ensure that those resources, the clarity around what that campaign looks like, exists outside of this school district, but also in every one of its classrooms. And I was really grateful to hear that our Larimer County just provided us additional resources to expand that, which I think is really quite incredible. There's a lot of work to do, but as you can see, the school district, as the main provider for youth services in our community, is a primary component of this work. But this has to involve every family, every parent, every philanthropy, every government leader, every nonprofit organization, every behavioral health provider to come together and try to identify ways that we can potentially stop doing some things and focus on what our kids are actually telling us that they need. And that's the spirit and the service in which we share this data today. We know as a community it's a courageous first step of telling this honest story. But we say it not to condone and shun and all of the incredible services that we are providing and working hard to improve every single day, but we say this as a means of telling the community that we can't do this alone and we need your help, and we must come together to figure out ways to be more strategic and efficient, because this is not just about throwing more money at this. This is about trying to identify how we can recruit a pipeline of behavioral health providers in this community. How we can take clinical education programs at our local higher ed universities and make sure that they're visible in our schools. How we can ensure that there's connective tissue between all of our nonprofits and philanthropies with the services that are being provided in our schools, so those types of services are right next to where the kids are, and it's not dependent upon family resources to access them. So I'm curious to know what the collective response and feedback and interpretation of this data is. But we came here today to talk about an honest story that is going to take courage and collective will to have collective impact. So I appreciate the time. Dr. Schmitz, is there anything else that you want to close with?
No, I just want to say, and I mean this, Brian, I'm just proud to have a superintendent who can speak so well to this issue as well as others. But I mean, that was just amazingly well said, in my opinion. And thanks very much for your time. And if there are any questions on the data, stick around and be happy to answer them.